Halfland, an ahistorical prehistory. Hunting halflings. In the summer of the year 84 of the Common Reckoning, in the aftermath of the Battle of Overwater, Grimbold the Skelding ordered all halflings to immediately leave the lands between Overwater, the southern foothills of the Twilight Mountains, the Silver Stream, and the sea. Any halfling who did not leave was sentenced to death, and bands of Skeldings rode through the territory, keen to enforce this penalty upon any halflings that they should find. Hunting halflings became quite the fashionable thing among young Skeldings of high birth, and one such Skelding was Godric, Grimbold's nephew and the grandson of the king. Godric heard of a band of halfling brigands based in the country to the west of Overwater, where the foothills of the Twilight Mountains declined into the farmlands of the plain, and determined that eliminating these lawbreakers would both provide him with entertainment and impress his contemporaries. So Godric donned his mail coat, took his spear and shield, mounted his horse, and rode west from the camp at Overwater. Alongside him rode his squire, Fulbert, clad in gambeson, carrying a shield and 2 javelins, with his sword at his side. Behind them marched 5 unarmoured men, 3 archers, and 2 men armed with javelins and carrying shields. After several days they tracked the halflings to a wooded hilltop. On one side of the hill stretched what had been halfling farmland, now deserted and littered with burnt-out farm buildings. On the other side of the hill, a sparsely wooded wilderness rose gradually toward the mountains. Godric took a circuitous path, approaching the hilltop from the direction of the mountains, intending to take the halflings by surprise. As he neared the hill, he divided his forces, sending the javelin men and a single archer to approach the hill from the right and flush the halflings out of the trees. He and Fulbert rode out to the left, where they could ride down any fleeing halflings. 2 archers remained in the centre, to bring down any halflings attempting to escape into the wilderness. On the right, the javelin men and archer crept along the top of a ridge toward the hilltop. The archer, who was called Oswin, remained on the ridge, a vantage point which would give him a clear shot at any halflings emerging from the trees. The 2 javelin men, who went by the names of Sigbert and Cuthwine, descended from the ridge, advancing stealthily toward the hill where the halflings were concealed. But their advance was not stealthy enough. There were 6 halflings atop the hill. Their names were Ludo, Minto, Mungo, Odo, Rollo, and Zack. Rollo was their leader, armed with a spear and a shield. Minto and Zack carried slings, while Ludo, Mungo, and Odo had bows. It was Minto who first heard something unusual. He alerted Rollo, who nodded and gestured at Ludo, who crept to the edge of the woods and peered down the slope, where he could see the advancing javelin men. He slipped back into the trees to alert his companions. The halflings decided it was time to leave. Ludo, Minto, and Odo were the first to move, slipping out of the forest and down the slope. At the bottom of the hill they clambered over a wall and into a deserted field. But Oswin had observed their progress. As Odo leapt down from the wall, Oswin loosed an arrow, and Odo stumbled and fell, lifeless, to the ground. Rollo, Mungo, and Zack now made their bid for freedom. They emerged from the wood on the other side of the hill to the approaching javelin men, and unobserved by them or Oswin, ran down the hillside and across a patch of open ground, heading toward another wall, bounding another field. After Odo had been shot down, Ludo and Minto fled, away from Oswin and Sigbert and Cuthwine. The halflings ran obliquely across the field they had climbed into until they reached the other side. They scrambled over a wall to find themselves in another field. To their left, Rollo, Mungo and Zack had scaled the same wall and entered the same field. Now, Rollo, Mungo and Zack may have been unobserved by Oswin, Sigbert and Cuthwine, but they were not unobserved by Godric and Fulbert, who spurred their horses toward the fleeing halflings. The first the halflings knew of their presence was when the galloping horses effortlessly cleared the wall on the halflings' left and charged into Rollo and his companions. Godric impaled Zack on his spear, and that was the end of Zack. But even at that moment, halfling reinforcements arrived in the form of Ludo and Minto, who had rushed to their leader's aid. Although the reinforcements were welcome, Rollo could look after himself. From behind his shield he thrust his spear at the horse towering over him, thrust straight and true, thrust his spear into the horse. The horse reared, throwing its rider. As Godric thus crashed to the earth, Fulbert swung his sword at Rollo, who turned and ran, leaping back over the wall he had crossed just seconds before. Fulbert did not have time to enjoy this moral victory. Mungo, Ludo and Minto swarmed him, grabbing his ankles, stabbing his legs with their halfling knives, pulling him from his steed and cutting his throat. While all this had been going on, Oswin, Sigbert and Cuthwine had been catching up with the fleeing halflings. As the retreating Rollo leapt over the wall, Oswin greeted him by loosing an arrow, which whistled past his ear, and then Sigbert and Cuthwine charged him, throwing javelins at him as they advanced. Rollo did not hang about, but leapt back over the wall, running to rejoin his companions, with Sigbert and Cuthwine in hot pursuit. The two Skeldings charged into the four halflings, who fought ferociously. After close encounters with a couple of halfling knives, Sigbert decided that he had had enough and withdrew back over the wall. This allowed all four halflings to concentrate on Cuthwine. They surrounded him, and although he fought valiantly, killing Mungo in the process, he was swiftly overwhelmed and slaughtered. And with that, the three surviving halflings ran away. The surviving Skeldings did not pursue them, but ran over to the prone body of Godric, who was unconscious, concussed, but otherwise unharmed. Godric slunk back to Overwater and did not talk of the events of that day. He also developed an intense dislike of halflings. On the other hand, the halflings talked and sang endlessly of the deeds of Rollo, Ludo and Minto, but it did them little good. Such small victories could not save their lands from the Skeldings.